Good afternoon and welcome. Can everybody hear me okay? Great, we have a wonderful new sound system here. Thank you, Alex Warren. It's wonderful to see you all here. This is our first reading in a series of very exciting events this year. Out of all the events last year, I think the kickoff was definitely one of my favorites because it really shows how strong the spirit is for poetry on this campus and in our community. My name is Kristen Spragna. I'm the lunchpoems coordinator. Thank you. In a few moments, you'll be hearing from a wide range of voices reading you a poem that has meant a lot to them in their lives. But first, I just have a few brief announcements. I want to encourage everybody to sign up on our mailing list by the librarian's desk. And with that, you will receive monthly email reminders about our events. We also have our beautiful posters. Thank you, Mary Scott, at the front. And we encourage you to take those and post them in your dorm, in your office, on your refrigerator, or anywhere where you'll be reminded of our events. And lastly, we are looking for a few more volunteers to help us publicize the events on campus. So if you're interested in the opportunity to lunch with a poet and to read in our student reading and also just to gain some experience in the literary arts, please speak with me after, or you can email me, and the email is on all of the publicity materials as well. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Tom Leonard, University Librarian, and our gracious host this afternoon.
Thank you, Christine. It is indeed a warm welcome. This is the 10th year of this wonderful program, and we look forward to at least another decade. This meeting here, this session, and maybe some to follow, will be graced by unusual sounds, perhaps the air horns from across the way, building the East Asian Library, perhaps the crash of materials from the Doe Annex Bancroft wing, where we are readying a new facility. Please think of these as in harmony with the humanities, because that is what these institutions will do. They will guard, among other treasures, poetry from the Sung dynasty on, from ancient papyri that bear classical verses to postcards from the beat poets. So we'll put up with the sounds just for a while. I just had a chance to access my cell phone and to turn off the ringer. I'm sure that the gifted amateur readers, I think they're all amateur readers, will appreciate that. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to your library, and I know you're anxious to hear from these 8 distinguished campus citizens. We will proceed in alphabetical order. This is, after all, a library, and it's my pleasure to first welcome Ani Adhikari, who grew up in Kolkata, India, and got her PhD at Berkeley, spent a few years at Stanford before returning to teach here. Her professional interests are the teaching and application of statistics. Like many Bengalis, she tells me, she grew up with a love of poetry and is currently rereading the poems of Derek Walcott. Ani, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Am I at the right height? Usually things have to be lowered. Let's see here. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here as a statistician. I don't get to do much of this, so I am taking the opportunity as it is presented to me. As I said to Tom, I am Bengali. And Bengalis, like many other cultures, are steeped in words and poetry from the day that they are born. And it is said that every Bengali youth at some stage has been the editor of a poetry magazine. It's the way you get driver's licenses here. And so I have chosen a poem which was written in Bengali by Tagore. It is always Tagore for a Bengali. Wherever we roam, it is to him we return. He is part of us. You won't hear Tagore. You'll hear a bit of Tagore. But the rest is me because I have put it into English. Now, that is an extremely foolhardy thing to do, and I fully expect to be struck by lightning while I'm reading it. So please tell my family that I love them. Which poem of Tagore to choose? Well, I went back and I chose the first one that I remember which was a life-changing moment for me. I was a little girl maybe 10 or 12 years old, and there was this poem, and it was a view of the world. And that view has informed my own since that time. And in these saber-rattling, indeed saber-wielding days, I wish that it were, I don't know, that it would inform others. So what is it about? This is a late poem, and the historical context is this. The British have been in India for 200 years, and they have officially ruled it for almost 100. Hitler's armies are marching across Europe, and all through the world, thoughts are of empire, power, domination. And here is Rabindranath, at the end of his life, reflecting on the story of his people, and telling me, aged 12, about what is transient and what endures. So I will read you first his own words, a few lines in Bengali, so that you hear the rhythm, and then I will switch to mine. Ora kaj kore, অলস সময় ধারা বেয়ে মন চলে শূন্য পানে চেয়ে সে মহাশূন্যের পথে ছায়া আঁকা ছবি পড়ে চোখে কতকাল দলে দলে গেছে কত লোকে সুদীর্ঘ অতীতে জয়োদ্ধত প্রবল গতিতে এসেছে সাম্রাজ্যলোভী পাঠানের দল এসেছে Mughals, yes? So you heard the Pathans, you heard the Mughals, now you get it in English. Listen to the rhythm, it flows like the waves. He is talking about what is eternal. They work. Along the lazy flow of time, my mind travels, gazing at the void. In that great emptiness, shadow-sketched scenes catch the eye. For so long have so many gone in throngs in the deep extending past, with their swift triumphant tread. Came the empire-hungry Pathan hordes, came the Mughals. Chariots of victory have tossed up nets of dust, flags of victory have flown. I look toward the void. Of them there is no sign. That unsullied blue is colored, age upon age, morning and evening, by the light of sunrise and of sunset. Once again, into that void has come, with its hordes, on iron-bound roads, in chariots breathing fire, the mighty England. It has radiated its force. I know. Over its path, too, will pass the flow of time. Far will it sweep empire's nation-binding snare. I know. Its army of merchants will leave not a scratch on the cosmos. I open my eyes to this world made of earth, and I see that there walks a multitude in a clamor of sound, on many roads, in many crowds, through the ages, for the daily needs of mankind, in life and in death. Always they hold the rudder, pull the oars. In fields they sow the seeds, harvest the ripe grain. They work in the cities and beyond. The royal crown crumbles. The drums of war raise not a sound. The victory column stands like a fool, its purpose lost. And all the bloodshot-eyed and bloody-armed keep their faces hid in children's tales. They work in one place and another, on the banks of the seas and the rivers of Anga, Bengal, and Kalinga, in Punjab, in Mumbai, in Gujarat. The rumbling roar, the humming song, are woven day and night to fill with sound the journeys of the day. In sorrow and joy, in the day and in the night, resonates the great mantra of life. Upon the ruins of 100 empires, they work. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Mary Katherine Birgeneau was born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, and received her Bachelor of Arts degree in English from the University of Toronto. She also has a degree in social work from Boston College. In the course of raising 4 children, she has weaved a career as a social worker and community leader with the Catholic Children's Aid Society of Metropolitan Toronto, the Catholic Family Services, worked as a language tutor for Laotian refugees, and in a parent-child home care program to help welfare mothers. When Robert Birgeneau assumed the top position at the University of Toronto before moving into our neighborhood more recently, she had and has a very important public role as the face and, in some sense, the symbol of our campus. Mary Katherine, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Although my husband and I were Canadian-born, we did spend most of our married lives in New England. So I must confess that I have chosen a romantic poem to read that probably is considered more of a sentimental poem these days and may not be as popular as it used to be. But when we lived in Boston for 25 years, we lived in Middlesex County, very close to Concord and Lincoln and Lexington and Sudbury. And in Sudbury, there is this lovely inn called the Wayside Inn, which was built in the early 17th century and is one of the oldest operating inns left in the U.S., or in North America probably. And Henry Wordsworth Longfellow visited the Wayside Inn and wrote about the tales of the Wayside Inn. So I have chosen to read you Paul Revere's Ride. It's fun. It's part of my husband and I's American connection with our Canadian beginnings. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, "If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church tower as a signal light. 1 if by land and 2 if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex county, village, and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm." Then he said, "Good night," and with a muffled oar silently rowed to the Charlestown shore. Just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide at her moorings lay the Somerset, British man of war, a phantom ship, with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friend through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears, till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and its measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. Then he climbed the tower of the Old North Church, by the wooden chairs with stealthy tread, to the belfry chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the somber rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade, up the trembling ladder, steep and tall, to the highest window in the wall. When he paused to listen and look down, a moment on the roofs of the town, and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath in the churchyard lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in a silence so deep and still that he could hear, like a sentinel's tread, the watchful night wind as it went creeping along from tent to tent and seeming to whisper, "All is well." A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed at the landscape far and near. Then, impetuous, stamped the earth and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the Old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber and still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in the village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing a spark struck out by a steed flying fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet through the gloom and the light the fate of a nation was riding that night. And the spark struck out by that steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep, is the mystic meeting the ocean tides. And under the alders that skirt its edge, now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the cock and the barking of the farmer's dog, and felt the damp of the river fog that rises after the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when he galloped into Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadow brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest. In the books you have read how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball from behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again, under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. I forgot to mention that one of our daughters had her wedding rehearsal dinner at the Wayside Inn.
Thank you, Mary Katherine. Janette Hernandez coordinates the Leadership Support Program for the Principal Leadership Institute, a title one can only decode easily if you remember what we learned in school, your pal, the principal. Indeed, Ms. Hernandez served as principal and assistant principal at Everett Middle School in San Francisco for 5 years. She held the position of instructional specialist for the Superintendent's Committee on Special Education. Hernandez also coordinated the district's literacy program for bilingual and special education teachers, Project Olé, Optimal Learning Environments. Janette, welcome.
Good afternoon. Well, being an educator, I decided to choose a poem from one of my students. While I was at Everett, we were fortunate to partner with a program called the Writers' Corps program, and it was a project of the San Francisco Arts Commission. It's a city community service that transforms individuals and communities through written word. and they would come to our school once a week and work with a group of students, and did amazing things. They were able to, once a week, and by the end of the year, they published a book and all of the students' poems. And since I left, this was in 2001, I always want to think about the voices of our children. So now we prepare principals for urban schools, and we provide support and mentoring for first-year principals and assistant principals in Oakland, San Francisco, and West Contra Costa County. And the work is really challenging, and we always go back, and I always go back and say we have to remember the voices of our children, because that's why we do this work. So I wanted to read this poem, a short poem called The Real Me by 13-year-old student Joyce Bonilla. The real me. I'm not the prisoner, but the officer. I'm not the mouse, but the snake. I'm not the world, but the universe. I don't follow it, I lead it. And I learn it bit by bit. Don't see me as an F, but as an A, embossed on a white sheet. Don't see me as a lie in a liar's mind, but as the truth in all who are kind. Talk to me, I'm not ignorant. I'm Peruvian, I'm not an immigrant. Don't see me as dumb, see me as wise. Come follow me into the world of paradise. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Harsha Ram has been teaching at UC Berkeley, spanning the course of the lunch poems I just noticed, for just over a decade. He teaches Russian and comparative literature. His field of expertise is poetry. He is the author of The Imperial Sublime, a Russian Poetics of Empire, and he's working on a new book entitled The Russian-Georgian Encounter Towards a Cross-Cultural Poetics. Welcome.
It's great to be here. I guess in terms of my professional background, I should be reading a poem from the Russian tradition, and that was precisely what I was going to do. But I changed my mind, and I changed my mind for reasons I think that are relevant, which is that I've been preoccupied in the last few weeks and months by a global conflict that I'm sure is very well aware, of which all of you are very well aware, and that is the conflict that appears to be pitting the West against the Islamic world. And I thought that it would be both fitting and important to read a poem from the Muslim tradition, but a poem that is not necessarily one of confrontation. It is a poem of defiance, but significantly it's not a poem that seeks to anathemize the West. And in fact, in many ways it is a poem of healing, which I would hope in some ways takes us beyond the kind of the so-called clash of civilizations that is being somewhat suicidally, I think, proposed by various people on either sides of this so-called divide. The poem is by a Pakistani writer called Faiz Ahmed Faiz, who died in 1984, and is regarded by most critics and readers as the most significant poet of the second half of the 20th century to have written in the language called Urdu, which is the official language of Pakistan as well as the language of North Indian Muslims, although its cultural significance reverberates well beyond that particular community. Faiz Ahmed Faiz was the uncrowned poet laureate of Pakistan through much of the second half of the 20th century. And I say uncrowned because his political radicalism forced him into a direct collision with the Pakistani state, which in fact arrested and jailed him for his views. He would in fact live for many years in exile in Beirut, in Lebanon, which was in fact in many ways considered in the mid-20th century the Paris of the Middle East. And he would also travel to the Soviet Union, which gave him in fact the Lenin Peace Prize in 1962. So I managed to smuggle in a little bit of Russia there for you. To his credit, Faiz Ahmed Faiz did not attempt to disguise or to dress his socialist as well as his anti-clerical views in the language of the secular Western Enlightenment. Rather, he did something I think which is much more interesting. He drew on the immensely rich vocabulary of the Indo-Persian cultural tradition, which has always long shown a marked capacity for irony, for paradox, for contestation, as well as mystical insight expressed as a defiance of religious orthodoxy, frequently bordering on blasphemy. In the poem that I'm going to read, the dream of social justice, the poet's dream of social justice and human solidarity, becomes one with the Sufi experience of mystical love. Secularism then finds an unexpected ally in what I might call a kind of spiritualized politics, which is contrasted with the conventions of a hypocritical religious piety, which was soon to be politicized with disastrous consequences not only for Pakistan, but of course, as we all know, for the United States as well. The poem is called, in fact, a prayer. And it's a provocative title because Faiz was known to be something of an atheist. And it was written in 1967 on the occasion of Pakistan's Independence Day. It's a very short poem of only 20 lines, so I have plucked up the courage to read it both in Urdu as well as in English. I'm not, with the caveat that I'm not a native speaker of Urdu, but I think I can get away with it. The English translation is by V.G. Kiernan, embellished a little bit by myself. So the poem in Urdu goes as follows. Dua. आइए हाथ उठाए हम भी हम जिन्हें रस्म दुआ याद नहीं हम जिन्हें सोज़ मोहब्बत के सिवा कोई बुत कोई खुदा याद नहीं आइए अर्ज़ गुज़ारें के निगारे हस्ती ज़हर इम्रोज़ में शीरीनी फ़रदा भर दे वो जिन्हें ताब गिरानबारी अयाम नहीं उनकी पलकों पे शबो रोज़ को हल्का कर दे जिनकी आंखों को रुख सुबह के यारा भी नहीं उनकी रातों में कोई शमा मुनव्वर कर दे जिनके कदमों को किसी राह सहारा का सहारा भी नहीं उनकी नज़रों पे कोई राह उजागर कर दे जिनका दीन पैरवी किस्ब रिया है उनको हिम्मत कुफ्र मिले जुरात तहकीक मिले जिनका सर मुंतज़िर तेग़ जफ़ा हैं उनको दस्त कातिल को झटक देने की तौफीक मिले इश्क़ का सिर निहा जाने तपां है जिससे आज इक़रार करे और तपिश मिट जाए हर्फ़ हक़ दिल में खटकता है जो कांटे की तरह आज इक़रार करे और खलिश मिट जाए. The English is as follows. A prayer. Come, let us too lift our hands, we for whom prayer has become a custom forgotten, we who, except for love's flame, remember neither idol nor God. Come, let us ask life, our beloved, to leaven today's venom with the sweetness of things to come, to let day and night play lightly on the lashes of those made sluggish by time's weight, to kindle with light the nights of those whose eyes cannot face the dawn, to chart and brighten the way beneath those whose feet stagger pathless, and to those for whom guile and dissemblance is the only religion, may she grant the boldness to blaspheme and the resolve to inquire. To those above whom the tyrant's sword lies poised, may she give the strength to repel the murderer's hand. Love's mystery is our fevered soul. Let us today make covenant with it to slake our fever. The word of truth that pricks our heart like a thorn, let us speak today and relieve its ache. Thank you.
Thank you. I have fumbled the alphabetical order, but I am going to make up for it. Davitt Moroney studied at King's College, University of London, and completed the master's program in musicology. He holds concert performance or held concert performance and teaching diplomas from London's Royal Academy of Music, the Royal College of Music, and he entered and completed his PhD here at Berkeley in musicology, spending then, I believe, the next 21 years as a celebrated recitalist, returning to us in 2001 to teach as professor in the music department. And he's also university organist, and I believe he is the only one in the room who has performed music wonderfully in this room on an earlier occasion. Nice to have you back, Deb.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's very nice to be back in this room again, actually. It's wonderful for intimate poetry readings or musical recitals. I think we should get into the habit of having more of these events of this kind, and more music in particular. Now, I have a problem because my poem is even shorter than the one that you've just heard. My poem is only 6 lines long. But in fact, I could easily talk about it for a whole hour. Indeed, I could construct a course around it for a whole semester of 15 weeks. In 1740, the composer George Frederick Handel wrote a magnificent pastoral ode called L'Allegro, il Penseroso ed il Moderato. His text was derived from 2 poems by John Milton, rearranged by Charles Jennens. Milton, in the 17th century, the age of chiaroscuro, had juxtaposed those 2 extremes in terms of human nature. The chiaro, here being the light and cheerful allegro, and the oscuro being the dark and brooding penseroso. Jennens, 100 years later, in the Age of Reason, felt it necessary to include a middle way, the path of moderation. So he added a 3rd poem called, again with an Italian title, Il Moderato. The forces of civilization that were at work were greater than Jennens himself. He is therefore a humble representative of something much more important than himself. My favorite poem from Il Moderato, which of course is therefore a libretto text, a category of poetry that often gets forgotten, even by poetry readings. My favorite poem is the text of the work's one duet. Jennens evokes the opposing claims of fantasy and truth. Now, although Charles Jennens's words embody noble, visionary concepts, he isn't a great poet. The poem is only 6 lines long, 34 words, and it'll take me 20 seconds to read. But Handel's music for this duet, on the other hand, is wonderful and lasts 7 sublime minutes. Not at all too long for that very brief text. Today I'm limited to 4 minutes, so unfortunately I can't play you the 2 versions of the piece, reciting the text and then giving you the music. I can't show you the ways in which intelligent music can in fact provide a profound exegesis of a poem. Handel expresses the noble concepts while nevertheless also clearly favoring fantasy and imagination. Jennens contrasts intellectual obscurity, symbolized by the night, with the daylight clarity of rational thought. When the founders of our university chose as its motto those words from the book of Genesis, fiat lux, let there be light, they also were thinking, I hope, of intellectual light, of rational truth as a bastion against obscurantism. And today, when battles need still to be fought to defend the teaching of Darwinian evolution and to maintain the separation between church and state, a short poem of 6 lines can carry a forceful, much-needed message. Jennens's image is of morning stealing up on night, melting away the shades or shadows of ignorance. Fantasy, here called fancy, is presented as intellectually dubious, rather like scholarship without footnotes. Against this, reason, rising reason, is honored as a rational process on the increase, something that can fight and dispel the vapors, the fumes that confuse or involve the mind. And for Jennens, the ultimate purpose of this intelligent sunrise is to restore what he charmingly calls intellectual day. So here is my poem for today from Jennens's Il Moderato. As steals the morn upon the night and melts the shades away, so truth does fancy's charm dissolve, and rising reason puts to flight the fumes that did the mind involve, restoring intellectual day. Thank you.
Thank you again, Davitt. Dean of Students Jonathan Pullard is here. He likes to be called JP. He has more than 20 years' experience in higher education and student affairs, most recently, before coming here, at Cal State San Marcos, where he was the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students. I know that Jonathan takes great pride, especially in leadership development programs, advising students in academic distress, and advocacy for students in a multicultural community. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. This is an African oral tradition. When you speak, you get spoken back to. All right. About 11 years ago, I received a book on my 30th birthday from a friend of mine called In Search of Color Everywhere. And it was a collection of poems and put together by an editor, Mr. Miller. And when I got the book, I literally read almost half of it at one time. And it was just page after page of wonderful prose. And in preparation for today, I couldn't really decide which one poem, so I chose 4 really short ones that give you a little sampling, you see. And everything from romance to inspirational poems to those that are a little bit more political. And I'm going to begin with one of my favorite, and that is by Langston Hughes, Dream Variation. Langston, of course, has much significance for me as an African-American gay man, even though at the time that he did most of his writing, that was not known to our world. So every time I think about him, I think about how he influences my life even today as a dean. Dream Variation. To fling my arms wide in some place of the sun, to whirl and to dance till the white day is done, then rest at cool evening beneath a tall tree while night comes on gently, dark like me. That is my dream. To fling my arms wide in the face of the sun, dance, whirl, whirl, till the quick day is done. Rest at pale evening, a tall, slim tree, night coming tenderly, black like me. My next poem, a little bit more on the political side, by Warren Cunning, called No Images, for me reminds me of how many of us in this thing we call the academy are very blessed and very fortunate that we have the opportunity to, sometimes what I do think about is to engage in intellectual masturbation and not always think about the benefits that we have as people and some folks who don't have them. No Images. She does not know her beauty. She thinks her brown skin has no glory. If she could dance naked under the palm trees and see her image in the river, then she would know. But there are no palm trees on the street, and dishwater gives back no images. Next poem by Alvin Albert, The Opposite of Green. Again, sort of takes a play on words and how we use language, I think, to describe ourselves. I mean, actually, there are no black people and white people. I mean, we have some ethnic background if you get right down to it, but the language that we use to describe who we are is sometimes very misleading. But it also is very powerful in terms of how we use white to describe all things positive and bright, and black all things negative and ugly. The Opposite of Green. The blonde neighbor lady tells my wife, looking square past her dark skin into her deep black eyes, I can't make things grow. I even kill weeds. I have a black thumb. Now the more romance side of me, big romantic. By Georgia Douglas Johnson. I want to die while you love me. I want to die while you love me, while you hold me fair, while laughter lies upon my lips and lights are in my hair. I want to die while you love me and bear to that still bed your kisses turbulent, unspent, to warm me when I'm dead. I want to die while you love me. Oh, who would care to live till love has nothing more to ask and nothing more to give? I want to die while you love me, and never, never see the glory of this perfect day grow dim and cease to be. And last but not least, Mari Evans, one of my favorite poets, wrote this poem called Who Can Be Born Black, kind of a direct opposition to the poem on the Green Thumb. And she talks about just the power and the beauty of being. And I love this poem. Mari Evans, Who Can Be Born Black? Who can be born black and not sing the wonder of it, the joy of it, the challenge, and to come together in a coming togetherness, vibrating with the fires of pure knowing, reeling with power, ringing around sound above sound above sound, to explode in the majesty of our oneness, in our coming together, in our coming togetherness. Who can be born black and not exalt? Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We have a new podium, and it sometimes vibrates, but I won't touch it. I want to welcome my colleague, Charlotte Rubens. Describes herself as a native New Yorker, born to working-class parents. She tells me that if I did a Google search on where she grew up in Queens, I would not find the word gentrification linked with that town. She graduated from SUNY Stony Brook and did some graduate work in Hispanic literature at Johns Hopkins, but decided, she says, that that was not her calling. She worked in a variety of jobs over many years, including a Chinese laundry and cleaners and a lace factory, until finding her calling in the library, where she works right around the corner, making sure that people around the globe and in California can borrow our books, and we in turn can borrow theirs. Charlotte.
This is driving me crazy. So actually what I said was that I was born in Long Island City, Queens, before gentrification was even a word used to what's happening there now. Anyway, I was asked to read a favorite poem because I work here. Monday was Labor Day, and so I've been thinking a lot about work, which, since I spend half my life here, I think about work a lot anyway. And I thought I would share my favorite poem about work. I want to honor labor in its many forms and honor everyone who in a million ways keeps the world going despite all obstacles by their work. I want to say in June I was in New Orleans for a conference. It was the first conference to be held there since Katrina. This was just a couple of days after the National Guard was called in. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Library folks have no fear. In addition to the conference, 900 of us arrived early or stayed later to work, to help rebuild. Some worked on housing. Some worked specifically to bring back the libraries. We all wore these yellow shirts. Not my color, but the local press referred to us as a swarm. Bees doing what it takes to build community. Painting, hammering, hauling boxes and furniture, sorting, filing, shelving, inputting, connecting. Connecting people to information and to each other. Everything it takes to get a library, a house, or a community working. There are 250,000 people there who needed this done. We worked in school libraries, high schools, community colleges, public libraries, and collections big and small. This was meaningful work and a job well done. Library workers spend our days in service. All over the world, we do whatever it takes to connect people to information in all its forms, so the human race and our cultures can move forward. Whatever you do for these moments, for these few moments, I want you to think about your own work and your place in the world. I believe meaningful work is important, and I keep this poem on my wall by my desk in case I lose sight of that on a bad day. This poem is To Be of Use by Marge Piercy. The people I love the best jump into work head first without dallying in the shallows and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who stand in the line and haul in their places, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry and a person for work that is real. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think you may have improved the sound system as well. Clare You will have the last word. Clare is chair of the Center for Korean Studies. She started here as a student and taught Korean for many years. She tells me, by the way, that Korean language courses are far oversubscribed. She received the Korean National Medal of Culture for her contribution to the cultural exchange between the United States and Korea, and is the author of several translated literary books between the two languages. Clare, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. It seems that all Koreans are poets at heart. Just ask any taxi driver in Seoul. He can recite you Azalea, a lyrical poem. And also take Chosun, the name of the original name of the country, which stands for the land of morning calm. What other country has a name with such a poetic expression as the land of the morning calm? Now, I was just listening to Ani's Tagore poem. Tagore happened to be worshipped by Koreans because I think we are all poets at heart. And also he happened to write about the land of morning calm, although he has never been to the country. The two poems that I'm going to read today come from two well-loved Korean poets whose poems transmit the essence of Koreanness. One is by Oh Se-young, a scholar poet with an underlying meditative spirit of Buddhism. And the other one is by Moon Jung-hee, a feminine feminist with a strong spirit of Korean womanhood. And then I'll start with the Moon Jung-hee's poem. It was translated by Walhi Che and Robert Hawks, and it's titled Grandmother and Mother. I've left Kimpo Airport behind and everything else. Pictures of my husband left at the bottom of a drawer. Oceanic breeze whispering my age, tucked safely inside my passport. Lightness has me fly despite the heavy suitcase, slurping freedom and the poet's loneliness, seasoned by the sea, ready for love. How is it then my grandmother and mother, both dead more than 10 years, eyes wide and round, follow, cling, and interfere deep within me, with every move I make. Be aware, they cautioned. Okay, the next poem is by O.C. Young, translated by Richard Silver, wonderful local poet, and myself. 3 in the morning, the river flows riverly. The sea is sea blue, pheasants nestle by mate. 3 in the morning. It is the hour when moonlit eyebrows drift, the Milky Way wets hair behind the ears, and the stars sparkle dreams in the forehead. Awaken at 3 in the morning, I recite the sutra. One is many, many is one. Following the teachings, I understand the meaning by the meaning. I understand the teaching, not being is being, being is not being, formlessness is form, and form has none. No nature is nature, nature is no nature. Are the words of the Garland Sutra, rush of the ebb tides surging in my heart, the rustle of oak leaves. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our wonderful readers. Thank you, Tom, for hosting the event. Thank you to everyone who makes Lunch Poems happen, and thank you all for being here today. I want to mention that the Holloway series has their first reading tonight as well at 7:30 in the Maud Fife room on the 3rd floor of Wheeler. And that annual faculty reading this year features Jeffrey G. O'Brien, Lynn Haginian, John Shoptaw, and Lisa Robertson. And all of our readings happen here at this time, 12:10 to 12:50, right here in the Morrison room on the first Thursday of the month. And as you can see from our schedule, we have poets coming all the way, from as close as El Cerrito, from all the way from Iraq. And our next poet on October 5th is Les Murray from Australia. So please join us for that event. And thank you so much for coming.